Hello and welcome back to the Trauma Corner podcast. Today is episode 3 and we are here with Harriet Shearsmith, where we talk about narcissistic parents, cutting contact with parents and choosing peace. Thanks for watching and listening. Okay, hello Harriet. Thank you so much for being here. It is an honour.
Hi.
How are we? How's your weekend?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Busy.
Busy.
My son had me up at 5 a.m. and then I was like barely awake downstairs. My wife came down at 8 with my daughter and my wife was like, "Can I go back to bed?" Yeah! Okay, so I'll start by talking about how we met. So I'm relatively new to this social media space, and you reached out to me when I was a guest on your podcast, and I like jumped in. I had like imposter syndrome. I was like, "Fucking, of course I'll be your guest." And then when we was talking specifically about my childhood and even more specifically about my mother, and you were relating, I was like, "Oh, I have no idea about your childhood and what you went through and your story." So I thought, what better way than to have you on my podcast and to talk about it and to help people understand about their childhoods and that their childhoods weren't normal. So for me, when we're kids, we can't question if our parents are right or wrong. They just have to be right, and we think this is the right way, and everything they do and say must be true. And they say, other kids have it worse, and I sacrifice so much for you. And we think, oh, fuck, I've got a great childhood here, and I've got great parents. So for me, it's a gradual awareness of how we understand that our parents weren't what they said they were. So, like, for me, I'd go and visit a friend's house, and I'd stay over his house for the night, and his family would, like, make food again after 1 o'clock, and I'm like, why are you guys eating, and why are you all nice to each other, and why are your parents not in bed, not speaking to you? And then you grow up and you get into relationships, you meet their family, and you're like, why are you all eating food together? What the fuck is going on here? Are you just playing happy families to impress me? So for me, it's a gradual awareness. But was there a point in your life where you thought, something wasn't right in my childhood?
I think I'm very much the same as you. I think it was very much a gradual awareness. For me, I had quite a different childhood, but there's lots of things, and we discovered this on my podcast on Following Mum, that there were so many things that were similar but
Yeah.
also quite different in the way that they present. And I think that's quite common with people who have toxic parents or narcissistic parents in particular, but they can look completely different. And that's when we start to self-gaslight and say to ourselves, oh, well, it wasn't really that bad, because we're brought up to do that. That's part of the conditioning of toxic parents. You bring up a child to believe that they're the problem, that it just wasn't that bad. So again, it was a gradual awareness. And I think that's the same for so many people. What was different for me was that I had a real enmeshment with my mum. So enmeshment, especially for covert narcissistic parents, which I believe my mum was a covert narcissist, not diagnosing anyone, but she has a lot of narcissistic behaviors. And I think from where I grew up, it was very much a case of anything that she liked, she did must be right, because she was almost godly. It's really weird when I look back at it, how much idolization there was with my mum and how anything she said would be right. I was almost like a little parrot. And when the penny really started to drop was when I started to get my own identity, and it was treated almost like it was a personal offense to her. Especially when I had my own kids, that's when I really started to step out of things. And as silly as it sounds, social media, I think growing up in the 90s, there wasn't really anything outside of your bubble. The 80s and the 90s, anything that was inside that little bubble, be it your family, be it your friends, everybody had their own kind of like little zone. And you weren't really as aware of the rest of the world and the bigger issues. And I look back now, my mum, she was very racist in the things that she would teach and say. She's very homophobic. And I look back and I think, yeah, no, I just took that as that's gospel. That's the way that we are. And that was from those bigger issues that are fundamentally different to who I am as a person today, to the tiny, teeny little things, even like, I don't like peas, which I always say this and people look at you like, okay. My mum did like peas. So she was always shooketh to the core when she'd cook peas and I'd be like, I really hate these because, and it became a topic of conversation, a joke that I didn't like peas because most children do. And I like peas. So why wouldn't you like peas? And it's because I'm a totally different person and was never allowed to be so. And there was a lot of parentification in my childhood where I was responsible, not so much for the physical things around the house or for, when we look at parentification, for anyone who doesn't know, you have different types of parentification. And people will often say, well, what you experienced wasn't that, because parentification is when you're responsible for, raising siblings, cooking, cleaning, paying the bills. That's physical parentification, but we also have emotional parentification, which I experienced a lot growing up, but thought was just a good sign of being a good, close daughter, part of the enmeshment. And it was very much a case of, like, I could tell you by the age of about 7, my parents' court transcripts for their divorce. And I was very much my mum's standing spouse and therapist and best friend, while simultaneously she would often say to me, oh, no, you're not my best friend. We're not friends because I'm your mother. It's not right to be friends with your child. And I'd be like, but you treat me like a friend. I don't understand. And you don't understand as a child. You just think that this is you being a good, normal daughter. And then once I had my kids, and again, social media, becoming aware of things outside of my own bubble and looking at other people's opinions and thinking, I don't agree with any of the things that my mum has always taught me. This is weird. Like, that makes sense what they're saying over there. And actually, I'm going to alter my opinion on that. And we'd go back and we'd have discussions, and it would be taken as a personal offense that I was daring to become my own person. And I've often said to her, because my mum lived with us, so I never, and this is also quite common within enmeshment, I never left my childhood home. I've lived in the home that I'm in now since I was 9. And my mum had myself, my husband, and 2 of our kids living with her. And eventually we got to the point where we were like, we pay all the bills, everything, absolutely everything. And we have nothing to show for it. We don't even have a rent book to go to a mortgage company and say, hello, we are good renters. We've got nothing. We really are like early 30s now. We need to either leave and buy our own home because we can, or we need to just move out and go and rent, or we need to buy this house. We could buy this house because then I'm not betraying my mum by leaving her. Like, even hearing myself say that now, I'm like, Jesus wept, that's fucked. But that was the space I was in. I can't leave her. She'll be completely alone. And that I can't do that to her. That would be so wrong of me. It would be normal. If anyone's listening to this and thinking the same thing, no, it's normal. And it's absolutely what should happen. I would never want my kids to feel that way. But I didn't. And we bought the property that we're in now, and built her an annex. So we knocked down the garage that was attached. We built her an annex. She was meant to move into the annex and live there. She designed it all. And the way in which we did it was we paid off her mortgage and bought the house for a lower cost price, which again is really common, and used the extra money that we would have paid if we'd have paid full price for the house to build this annex. So when it came time to move into the annex, Mum took about 2-3 months after the annex and everything was completed, after all it was built, to move into it, and kept saying to me, you will not force me into this. And I was like, it's a custom built flat with its own bathroom, bedroom. And she set ground rules into place as to what we had to do, or what I had to do for her, because at that point my husband was just like, fuck off. Absolutely not. But I had to cook her dinner every night, and she had to come and eat with us as a family. I needed to buy her a new car because her car was a bit old. If she wanted to go on holidays or anything, I would pay for that. And that was only right because she'd helped us get on the property ladder.
In your mind, you just think, okay.
Yeah. And I just sat there going, yeah, that sounds good. Yeah. And I remember telling it to friends and then being like, and actually laughing. And then going, shit, you're serious.
Yeah.
And even now, I still struggle with that. I still, years into estrangement, still struggle to not look back and go, well, I did kind of owe her. Even now, it's that indoctrinated in you. And I have to step back and remind myself and my inner child, that's not how it should be. That's not normal. That's not okay. What you're experiencing there was financial and emotional abuse, and you didn't deserve it. So we built this annex. Mum moved into it. I think we lasted about 6 months because she just got nastier and nastier. We couldn't be in the same room without her calling me names, without her being really nasty. And it just became so much more toxic. And again, it was that, I think it was that final attempt at being my own person, that stepping away. If we'd have just moved out, it would have been as nasty, but at a distance. But because it was all still within the same house, she still had that control. So her spite was massive. And now I look back at it, I don't think it was really that different. It was just less subtle, because she didn't need to be subtle anymore. She knew she'd lost the control of me as a person and that I was becoming independent. So she just took the filter off. Whereas before it had always been really covert, now it was overt. And I remember going over and saying to her, look, we'd even discussed if the annex is not working, if you're unhappy, I'm unhappy, whatever, this is what we'll do. We'll make sure that we remortgage and you get all of the money back that you would have spent. This is what we'll do. And I'd said to her, look, I'm not happy. You're not happy. You refer to the annex as a shed. And it's literally a custom built flat. Like, you hate it here. You tell everyone you hate it here and how miserable you are. I think the best thing to do is to go back to plan A and you move out. We'll make sure we remortgage. You won't be a penny out that you wouldn't have been if you'd have sold it to a stranger. That's fair. And now looking back, that's also not fair. But that was how we'd worked it. And she said, no. And I just remember at that particular moment, it was almost like I'd had a split in personality at that particular moment, like totally disassociated away from it, stopped, and almost like an out of body experience, stepping back going, oh shit, this is not, this person in front of me is not who I've always needed them to be, not who I've always hoped for them to be. And I knew that on some level already. Our relationship was so toxic and nasty for months before that. But it was just almost like the ultimate power play for her, and the shock of her just going, no. And she'd said, I will not be paid off like some cheap prostitute. I will not leave. And I was like, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know many prostitutes that are getting that whack, but you crack on. That's fine. It was such a shocking moment because, again, this had been something that we discussed. Everybody was miserable. And I'd even said to her, this is destroying my marriage. The kids are really unhappy. This is so toxic. This is the ultimate solution. And I didn't want to be no contact at that point, but we ended up having to go through the legal process with solicitors to remove her from the house. And she added interest to what she wanted. She got quite a lot more money out of us, which was worth it to have her gone. But we were in the position to be able to do that. And I think she was genuinely hoping that we wouldn't be, so that she could continue to stay there. And what she told the solicitors she wanted was to have no relationship with me, to live in the annex that had been built for her, and to have a relationship with my kids. That's what she wanted. So she would be able to watch us through the window. The annex is literally next to the house, but not speak to me because I was awful and I was just being controlled by my own husband and just a terrible person. And again, that is that enmeshment, because to think of me being able to make decisions for myself, it must be my husband that's making them for me now. I can't make them. And it's that complete stripping of your identity. I feel like I've really waffled there, but that was how we ended up getting to the point where we cut contact, and eventually she did move out. And the only contact that we've had since has been surrounding the kids, who are also no contact, because she repeated a lot of the behaviors that I noticed when I was a child with my eldest son. things like encouraging lying, allowing him to do things that were far too grown up, but then lying about it because she knew we wouldn't like that as parents, that kind of behavior, pitting the kids against each other, that sort of thing. And I think that, to go back to your original question, that was when I'd started to really remember things from my childhood, because a lot of it I didn't remember. But when I really started to remember things from my childhood and see them in a different light is when I started to see them repeated.
Yeah. You didn't waffle at all. It's good to talk about this because so many people go through similar events and think it's normal. And like you said, your mother wanted you to buy her a car and do this, and you think, okay, I owe you.
That was exactly it. I owe you. And she used to say the classic, after everything I've done for you, all the things that I've sacrificed for you. And, you know, she was a single mum. And there was a lot of alienation with my father. But my father, let's make no bones about it, was a giant douche canoe. And he was not a good person anyway. There was a lot of behaviors that actually, looking at him, were overtly narcissistic and were incredibly toxic as well. A lot of sense of grandiosity, lots of real nasty behavior. Like I remember being about 6 and him ringing me and me saying, being an excited, I might have been a bit older, maybe I was more 9, and him ringing me and being super excited that I was telling him what a good day I'd had with my mum and her boyfriend. And he didn't ring me for weeks because I'd offended him by saying mum had a boyfriend. That kind of behavior. So neither of them were great. And we shan't start on my stepmother. I had a trio. They were it's like a trifecta of shit.
Isn't that... Go on.
It's mad when you look back at it and you think, as an adult, how could none of you have been a responsible adult? How could none of you have been there for that child that was at the center of all of that? But it's that sense of owing. And because I knew she'd had such a rough time with my father and his wife, even though I can see there was a lot that she twisted and manipulated, and she did, I don't think they were in some ways half as bad as she made them out to be. And I think it all became a vicious cycle. I felt even more so like I owed her everything. And I remember I used to write in Mother's Day cards and things, I owe you everything. Used to send her Father's Day cards saying, thank you for being what my dad couldn't be. All of these things that now I look back, I just think, Jesus, that's so sad to think that she had me in such a place where I felt I had such a debt to her. It's that debt mindset that's instilled.
Yeah. It's nuts when you say things like, your mother said, after all I've done for you and after all I've sacrificed. It's literally, and I know people watching and listening will think the same thing, it's like you're speaking about the same person, and your mother's my mother and my mother's their mother, because they all say the same fucking lines. Like, where do they get that from? When you say about your father, I relate too. So my parents were married for 6 months and then divorced when I was 2, and my father left. He was 18 when I was conceived, and I'd see him like once a year, always drunk. He had his issues, but my mother would always paint him to be the worst villain in the world. And a lot of the time when we have 2 parents, and so I would see my father as the worst parent and automatically see my mother as the best in the world. And my mother would reinforce that and call him everything under the sun all the time. And then when he died nearly 3 years ago, my mother was like, I want to go see his body. I was like, no. She was like, he was my husband. I was like, yeah, for 6 fucking months. Because they just love to be the victim. And they were like, they would love to go and see him so they can tell everyone, and then everyone can feel bad for them. I was like, I'm not giving you that.
Right. So my dad died just before I was 16. Like, this man used to do all sorts of stuff around my birthday. And honestly, dying a week beforehand was the creme de la creme of rude. But he did. He died just before my birthday, just before my 16th. And I remember my mum sitting me down. And just before my 17th, I was 16. And I remember her sitting me down with my then boyfriend, both of them holding my hands, looking really sort of sad and sympathetic. My mum was in floods of tears. I've got to tell you something. Your dad's died. I just remember 16-year-old Harriet completely shutting down. You know, that cold drip feeling that you get. And I don't know, I very rarely spoke out against my mum, but I just remember looking at her and going, what the fuck are you crying for? You absolutely hated him. And it pulled her up a bit. And I don't know where it came from. It was almost like this anger bubbled up. Why are you crying? You hated him. And by proxy, I hated him. Why are we sad now? I can't get this. This is confusing me. And I just remember with such aggression saying to her, why the fuck are you crying? And she'd, well, I still loved him very much because he gave me you. I was like, you hated him. Where are we? And she used to say things like, I will always have a place in my heart. I will always love your dad because he gave me you. And I think as well, that contributed a lot to some of the toxic relationships that I had growing up with partners, because to me, there was always that bit of mixed, we love someone, but we can also hate them, but we can, no, that's toxic. Yes, I understood what she was trying to convey at the time. But yeah, that's so funny that you've said that she was wanting to see, because my mum wanted to go to the funeral, and actually I ended up being stopped from going to the funeral because my mum would not let me go without her. She wasn't comfortable for me to. She said that she would drive me up to Scotland, which I don't know where your listeners might be, but if you're in America and you're thinking, God, yeah, that must be so many miles away. We're in North Yorkshire, so you're talking like 4-hour drive. It's not far. And she wanted to drive me up and said she would sit in the car park. And of course, his wife, which I don't blame her for now as an adult, had said, absolutely not. That's not happening. You are not sitting outside the funeral home staring in at me, scowling. Aunts had offered to come and pick me up on their way up from Kent and said, we will come and pick her up and do this. And me feeling that I needed to be loyal to my mum had said, absolutely not. If my mum can't bring me, I'm not coming. And they'd said, well, then you won't come. And I look back now and I think, yeah, I get it. I get why they wouldn't want her there. And by proxy, I get why they didn't particularly want me there either, because I could be really horrible. And I probably would have been horrible at the funeral to her, because that's how I'd been raised to be to his wife. Yeah. And that's, she was a psychiatrist, so she should have known that that's what would happen. And that's what was happening with this child who was caught in the middle of everybody. But I think it was a really sad fallout of that circumstance. I didn't go to his funeral. I found out recently that he was cremated. So there isn't even anywhere to visit or to, just go and tell him I think he was such a dick and why he didn't help. There isn't anywhere to do that now. And I wouldn't be in contact with any of them. So
it's nuts. Again, that's something that I would feel is really personal to me about that experience, and you relate to, which is nuts. I remember, I think it's the one time my mother's ever been proud of me, right? I think I was 17 and I had my first car, and my father was really into his cars. And I remember actually sitting on a main road where I live, sitting on a bench, watching cars coming past and forcing myself to learn them so I could be like my father, even though I barely fucking knew him. And then I've had 27 cars now, right? A lot of them have been shit. But I remember cleaning my first car that I had, and my father pulled up. And he was like, don't forget. My mother was watching out the window, I didn't know. And he was like, don't forget, you can come and see me whenever you want. And all this. And then he said, can I have a hug? And I was like, no. But I've been trained to fucking hate him. My mother said to me, right, never spoke about this. My mother said to me, one day, Ben, you're going to kill your father because you have so much hate for him. I didn't know the person. My mother forced me to think that I had so much anger within me for my father. Little did I fucking know it was for her. So my father was like, don't forget, you can come over and see me whenever. So first time in my life, I spoke up for myself, and I was like, you weren't there when I needed you, and now I don't need you. I'm 17. And then he asked for a hug. I said, no, he got in his car and he sped off. And I went back in the house, like shaking, because I'd never spoken up to fucking anyone. My mother was like, oh, you give in to him and all this, you spoke to him. And I was like, no, I told him I don't need him anymore. And she was like, oh, well done, so proud of you. As if like, you're finally part of me. What you said at the start there about having the awareness of your childhood wasn't the childhood you deserved was when you start having your own identity and start coming into authenticity. And I think that's when you become a threat to your parents. So when you get into a relationship, they hate it because they're fucking miserable and they love life. When you get a job and you're earning money, they say, how can you spend money on yourself when I can't afford my bills? And they make you feel guilty for being yourself. So I think that's where this awareness starts as well, because you become yourself, and they hate it because you're no longer an extension of them and you can no longer be controlled. You also said about them becoming a parent, and everything else becomes more apparent. So when you have a baby, I think that you look at your child and you think, how the fuck did my parents do something they done to me to something so innocent, to a child? And then various stages, your kids are older than mine, but various stages through their life, you get triggered again. So like I spoke about this a few months ago. My daughter, she's 2.5, and it must have been like 2 months ago, she jumped up on the sofa and fell and headbutted me. And I was like, ow, ow, ow. And it did fucking hurt. I was like, ow, ow, ow. And she said, sorry, sorry. And my heart sank. And I turned to my wife and I was like, oh, I hope she's not afraid of me. And my wife Jess was like, what the fuck are you talking about? You're just saying sorry. But when I was a child, if I accidentally, like, gently hurt my parents, if I dropped something on their foot, for example, my mother I'm talking about, I'd have to say sorry, 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 and then run because I was going to get hit back. So as soon as my daughter said sorry twice, she went, sorry, sorry, it took me back to memories I'd forgotten about. Are there anything that, or any moments that when you were a parent throughout these stages, you get triggered again and you're brought up to your childhood?
Oh, I think there are so many. And I think it's my eldest actually that I find my eldest and my daughter, who's my youngest, I think, and that's not to ignore my middle son. It happens as well with him, but I find they both trigger me in different ways. So my eldest, I feel a lot of guilt and shame around my earlier parenting. So I was raised with smacking, and remember, for the first 8 years of my eldest life, my mum lived with us, and it was always, you should parent this way, you should parent that way. So he had a very different version of me, and one that I'm not proud of, in his earlier years. And I've sat down and spoken to him about it, and he's like, no, mummy, you weren't like that. That's, you've been a lovely mummy. And I think, yeah, that's cute, but that's what kids will always say. I don't feel I was a lovely mummy to you. And I'm now talking to him about it, making that repair. But for him, it's when he pushes back at me a lot now, because he's 12, nearly 13. And I'm really proud of that, because he's not frightened of me. And I think had I continued to be the parent that I was, that was, would shout a lot, would smack sometimes on the hand or on the bottom, that's not who I want to be. I think that's abusive. I don't think that's acceptable behavior, but that's how I was taught to parent. And my middle child actually turned around to me the other day and said, why do some people, I think it was, how did he word it? I think he'd seen something on the TV and they'd said, I think it might even have been young Sheldon, you'll get a whooping or something like that. And they'd said, the eldest son had said, oh, I got a whooping, I got a smack. And Toby had turned around to me and said, you never smack, do you, Mum? You don't smack. And I said, no, I don't, but I might have done when I was younger. And I think I can maybe remember twice when he'd had a smack. That was it. But that was too much. That wasn't acceptable. And I can look at that now and say, that's something I'm not proud of. I need to build a repair.
That's good parenting. And I think like none of us are fucking perfect, right? And I think when we have parents like you and I had, you try and be the best parent in the world because you don't want that for your kids. So what happens, I think, is we remember the small parts of our bad parenting that we do ourselves and forget about all the fucking good parts. So you just said that maybe you would smack your child, but you sat down and you repair that, which our parents never fucking done. And I'm sure you put a video up, I think it was relatively recently, about how your child said something like, I didn't like the way you spoke to me there, mother, and something along those lines. Can you elaborate on that?
He did. So again, and this, you are quite correct there in that you do focus in on the negative things, but I think also for me it's so important to build that repair, because none of us are perfect and none of us are going to get it right, and we do have a blueprint from our own parents that we've had to unlearn, and that's been a real process for me. And that, I think, where my eldest triggers me is in those moments. And what I'd said in this video was about cycle breaking parenting, when your eldest child will sort of go, I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but it's like when they call you out and say, actually, don't speak to me like that because I won't accept that. That's not respectful. And you're like, oh shit, actually, that's quite correct. And obviously it's not always that eloquent for a 12-year-old boy, but that is something that actually triggers me quite a lot, because I would not have had that. I remember being chased up the stairs once and turning around, and my mum thought it was hilarious, and how she could have thought it was funny is beyond me. But she said I ran up the stairs holding my bum, which tells you everything you need to know. And I got to the top of the stairs and I hid round the corner, and I can still see it in my mind's eye now. And I looked down and I went, what's wrong with you, Mum? Something's gone wrong with you. And she said she thought it was so funny because I was so hysterical because I thought that she was having a complete breakdown. But it was like something out of Red Room, like, you know, Red Room, where he's, what's he called? I can't remember the actor, but that very famous movie, The Shining, I think it is, where he's trying to batter down the door. That's what I thought was happening. Now, as an adult, I don't see anything funny about that. Not even vaguely, but she sat at the bottom of the stairs and she was in tears of laughter because it was so funny that I'd had such an overreaction because she was mad with me. That was what it was. I think I'd been really cheeky. I was about 15 and she'd asked me to go and get the Christmas lights in, like mid-January, and asked me to get the Christmas lights in. And I'd gone and collected them, chucked them down because I wanted to play The Sims. Normal teenage behavior.
I think so many of us play The Sims to create this life that we should have had. I'll leave that one there, yeah.
Right? Like, if you didn't know how to type in motherload and get yourself an extra so that you could be rich and happy and not have to worry about, like, you didn't have to have parents that went to work all the time and you could just have the whole little family here and you occasionally murdered the dad and the mum. Like, okay, there's a lot to unpack there. There's a lot to unpack. I think The Sims could be a psychologist's dream. Yeah. But that's normal for teenagers. I was just being a typical stroppy, moody teenager. And I look at my son now and I think, God, would I find it funny if I frightened him? Yeah. Would he even be frightened? The answer's no. I'm shorter than him and he wouldn't see me in that light. And it was just the difference between my eldest and my middle son saying to me the other day, you never smack, do you, Mum? And I said to him, I think I did when Ruben was really small, actually. Ruben's had a really different mummy to you. And it's really important to me to be better for him because I don't think I was the best to begin with, but that just goes to show you the difference that you had. And Ruben sort of sat in the corner on his phone, lifted his eyebrows at his brother as if to say, you'll never know. Like,
yeah, but you should be proud of that. And like what you said there is interesting because you said that your mother chased you up the stairs and you held your bum and said something must be wrong with you because you thought she had a breakdown. And then the way you worded that is you said your mother was laughing at the overreaction. That's not a fucking overreaction. That's a trauma response because you don't want to get beat.
Yeah. See, these things will stick with you.
Exactly. I remember my mother was a British kickboxing champion and I fucking knew about it. And at times she would sit on me on the sofa so I couldn't move my arms and get my sister to just pull my hair and just like fucking gang up on me. And to me that's funny to talk about. And I'm like, why are you not laughing at that? But to someone else, I remember I think it was the last time she hit me was because I got quick. So I had these metal bunk beds and she proper just fucking swung for me and I went and she hit the pole on the bunk beds and her face just went red, like, because she had hit the bunk bed instead of me. And then she stopped. Then she thought, oh fuck, I'm hitting a young adult here instead of a boy and he can fight back. Like, obviously I never did. When we are at the stage where we are, I've been in no contact with my mother a couple of times throughout my life. And I think one of the last times is I gave her a car. This was years ago. I gave her a car and I said, just pay me back monthly. And she just didn't. And then I was like, look, I need the money. And I was on steroids at the time, which she was injecting me with. And I was in a bad place anyway, but I needed the money. And then she wasn't, so I thought, okay. And she was like, I never told you I'd give you the money back monthly. So, all right, she was sleeping. I went down there, I got the spare key, I took the car. And not the best move. I texted her, I said, look, you are a manipulative, see you next Tuesday. And I can't wait for your daughter to see the truth. And then months later, we got back in contact. This time with no contact since March because she found my TikTok videos. And I'm at a stage of where I know my self-worth, where I will not go back ever. Like, this is it, and I finally understand my peace now. In your eyes, so for me, there's normally 3 steps of no contact. And I'm never one to promote no contact. I'm one to promote peace in whatever shape or form that takes. Normally 3 steps is what I tell clients. First step is tell your parents how they treated you, how they made you feel, how it's affecting you now. They take accountability and change. Doesn't usually fucking work. Second one is boundaries. So if you're speaking to them, see them once a week, see them once every 2 weeks or once a month. And then the third one is no contact. So for you, how would you tell people to approach no contact in the way that brings them the most peace? Because some people give peace. Some people feel guilty, some people are terrified of it. What would you suggest that would bring this person the most peace?
It's a really difficult one. Probably not the way that I did it. I think, for me, it was really hectic. And I think it's great if you can go no contact in a way that is fitting for you. But in my experience, when I work with clients or when I speak to people, because they're talking about the podcast, it almost always happens with a big fracture. It almost always happens with an event that you think, nah, that's enough, fracture. And that's it. And I think that's really difficult. But if you do have the opportunity, I often recommend because I'm a coach, the same as you, I often recommend writing it out. Yeah. Whether you are going to give it to your parent or not is another matter. I have one client that I worked with. There is no way that she could give that to her parent because it would just open up the door for so much attack, both physical and emotional. There's just no way that it was going to work for her. But actually writing it out, everything that she'd experienced, all the reasons why she felt no contact was appropriate for her, really helped her. And it might be that you choose to give that to your parent. It might be that you choose not to, and you choose just to get it out of yourself. But doing that, I think, is a great first step.
Yeah.
And if you want to explain to them that you are done, sending a brief message, usually I would say not face to face, not over the phone, but written down, be it an email or be it a text message, whatever it is, that just explains, this is what's happening. I'm not going to, I need a bit of space in my life. You don't necessarily need to say, that's it, I'll never speak to you again, and hair flip your way out of the situation. It's not going to make any difference. They don't need to know that that is it. And then block. And that's, for me, single-handedly, blocking has been the difference that I have seen, especially in clients, between peace and not peace. And I do think there has to be a certain level of preparation for flying monkeys for the rest of the family. I have one client who, she didn't even try to end the relationship with her mother. She literally set a boundary around an event that she didn't want her to attend. And the mum was then, well, that's it, I'm never going to speak to you again. Big, flamboyant. And her mum didn't mean it. Her mum was just hoping to, typical, terrify her into compliance. And she didn't. She just said, okay, that's fine. And what she'd had then was a sustained attack over a period of weeks from everybody, and distant family members, people who she doesn't even know, who'd got her email and got her phone number from mum. So I do think you have to be mentally prepared for that, but you have to just block those things as soon as they come in. Don't respond to them, just block. For a lot of people, it's really difficult when it comes to blocking, because they feel that that parent perhaps is the only route to get to other family members, be it an elderly grandparent, be it an elderly family member, an elderly friend, whatever it is. That parent often sits there as a blocker. So I know that is really difficult for people, but I have seen a massive difference. And for me, blocking my mum was huge, because after the big fallout where I'd asked her to leave the house and we'd started to engage solicitors, I shit you not, she texted me one day and said, Harry, which I've always hated being called Harry. She knows it. She's always called me Harry. My Sky isn't working. Can you come and fix it for me? I'm going to go no.
As if nothing happened.
Just to add, that's in the house that she didn't pay rent for. And the Sky was what I paid for. And the Wi-Fi that was necessary for it, I also paid for. And I went over, she was pulling into the drive about 10 minutes after I received this message, and I went out to her and went, what the hell are you doing? I've asked you to leave my home and you're texting me to ask if I can come and fix your Sky. Well, I thought you'd have got over that by now. Absolutely not. Like, you need to leave my house. And that was the last message I ever received from her, because after that I blocked her number, and that was when all the legal proceedings and things really started. We'd already sought a bit of legal advice, but blocking her number, I know, made a massive difference, because she couldn't access me then. Yes, for that period of time she could physically access me because she was living in the annex. But once she'd left the annex, I fully expect that had I not had her number blocked, there would have been a really cutting message on the day that she moved out. I know there would have been, but she couldn't get that to me. And on that particular day, I'd actually gone up to my mother-in-law's for the day with the kids. And my husband had gone out and done something else, and then he'd come home to wash down the annex because she'd really trashed it, like let the animals pee everywhere, spilt coffee on the walls, that kind of thing. And he came back and insisted on cleaning that because he said he didn't think that it was appropriate for me to do. And we were in a really bad place at that time, really bad place, and practically not together. It was an awful time, but he still, as another adult, recognized that that just wasn't something I needed to be doing. But I know if I hadn't have had her blocked, I know that there would have been so much abuse. And I think being no contact has to mean no contact. It has to mean that you block off every available opportunity for them to get at you, because it's not for them to, I think we hope that, and I do lie actually, because occasionally I have unblocked the number just to see if there's ever any messages that will ping through. I haven't done it for a long time, but for a period of time I did, just to see if there's anything that would ping through. And nothing ever did. I think perhaps, I don't know if they expire after a period of time or if you'd get a barrage if she did message. But I think you hope that there will be this kind of, I'm really sorry for everything I've done. I see the error of my ways. And the blunt truth is, it ain't coming. And if it is, it's not meant. It's not sincere. People who spend a lifetime treating you as if you are just an extension of them, or as if you are a tool to be weaponized, or as if you are nothing, do not change their behavior towards you after a lifetime of that behavior. And that's a really hard truth to accept. And it's accepting that for yourself. And I think the first port of call when you have chosen to go no contact is to get those feelings out of yourself and then actually block everything and get yourself into therapy or whatever works for you. Speak to somebody that you can trust.
I think blocking is important too, because a lot of people like send a text, fuck that, fuck you, that's it, I'm not talking to you anymore. Or they send this letter that we talk about, and then they wait for a reply, which is contact, not no contact. And a lot of people say, well, if I cut contact with my mother or my father, the rest of the family won't speak to me. That's not family. If your family can, if they are family, they will see both points of view and they will still be in contact with you. I recommend a letter too, but what I say is write an angry letter and say, fuck you, eat shit, you were never there for me. And then write a peaceful letter, take all the emotion out and say, I don't need to understand my feelings, because you never have, but I'm on the path of peace, and to have this peace I can't have you in my life, and I wish you all the best. And then burn in the angry letter and send in the peaceful letter, so you get that release too. Do you have any advice for the people who are in a place where they're too young or financially or waiting to go to uni, where they are stuck at home with these parents, and how they can protect their peace?
Yeah, so I think when we work with, there's plenty of people that we know work. So when you are in a position where you cannot cut contact or you're unable to leave the place where your parent is, setting boundaries is huge. And that's not setting boundaries in terms of saying, okay, I'll only see you on this occasion, because that might not be an option available to you. But setting boundaries around what you will and won't tolerate is a massive step forwards. And again, it's really difficult because that's something that I did with my mum. I set boundaries. I used to start pulling her up on things at the dinner table. Like, one of our boundaries, believe it or not, had to be, do not make racist remarks or homophobic remarks at the dinner table in front of my kids. Don't do it. And she would, without fail, most days bring up things like the refugees coming across on boats. And I remember saying to her every time, Mum, that's not a topic of conversation that we need to be having at the dinner table. I've asked you not to say that. Please stop. And the reaction from it was volatile. I think you have to be aware that sometimes the reaction is going to be volatile, but you still have to keep doing it. There are plenty of people who are in relationships with narcissistic people, or with people who have NPD, BPD, whatever it might be, who have the potential to become volatile, who have the potential to react poorly through their own trauma if you set boundaries with them. And the main advice from anyone who has any knowledge of psychology is always set them even firmer, because that's the only way in which people can understand that you mean it. In terms of, and it's really awkward because it is a case of calling it out as, actually, I'm just going to stop the conversation here. I'm not going to tolerate you speaking to me like that. And you can do that at any age. You can do that at any age, but it is really difficult. If you are a young person who has a threat to safety, then I think one of the most powerful things that you can do for yourself is speak to somebody who is safe space. And I understand that might not necessarily be school. I understand that might not necessarily be university, whatever it is, but there will be somebody who you are able to speak to, even if it's a peer. Because sometimes setting that boundary, especially if you are 14, 15, that kind of age range where you know enough of yourself and you're stepping into your own self and creating your own identity, it's not necessarily safe. You might be physically attacked. It's not black and white. It's really difficult.
Yeah.
Setting boundaries, stepping up for yourself and being there for you, especially if you're an adult, is so important. Doing that inner child work as well whilst you're going, if you're an adult. If you're a young person who's in this situation, then again, it is a case of finding a safe space for somebody to offload to talk to. But if you are an adult who's doing it, working on that inner child and reassuring yourself, I think is really important. Reparenting yourself, which all these terms sound quite kooky and you listen to them and you're like, oh, cringe. But they are there for a reason, because they really do work. I find inner child work in particular quite difficult. There seems to be some resentment there for that child not being able to make a change, which is something that I think we don't talk about very often. Almost like, oh, well, why didn't you notice this? Why didn't you stop that? Which is really difficult, because as an adult, I can sit in that space and say, well, of course, that little Harriet, 8, 9, 10 years old, couldn't stand up for herself, couldn't do these things. Of course she couldn't. But almost like as a younger Harriet thinking, but why didn't you know? Why couldn't you work it out? Why did you think your mum was the best? So working on those things and reminding yourself that you are not at fault for this situation. You're not responsible for someone else's behavior. You can only be responsible for your reactions. You can only be responsible for your behavior, and standing up for yourself when it is safe to do so.
Yeah, thank you. What about for the people who are just finding, people like you and I, just randomly scroll across a video and is like, your childhood wasn't normal, and they're like, oh fuck, and it opens a can of worms. What advice would you give to people who are overwhelmed in the understanding of their childhood wasn't the childhood they thought they had? Where should they start?
Yeah, it's really difficult to get started. It is so difficult because it's almost like everything comes rushing at you at once. And I was speaking to a client the other day, and she'd said this big event had happened in her life, and it was almost like everything had come up all at once. Everything bubbled to the surface. She'd suppressed her parent had passed away, and she'd suppressed all of these things throughout all of her childhood, adulthood, and then all of a sudden, boom, it came up for her. And I think that quite often happens when we start to have an awareness of how toxic our childhood is. It's very triggering. It is very triggering, especially when you see other people talking about it. One of the things that I think is really important is to do the self-work, yes, but also to be gentle with yourself. Do not consume yourself in these things. And I know that's quite difficult when you look at things like TikTok. Your FYP becomes flooded with the things you engage with, but also finding joy in those things. Like my FYP is a pretty decent mixture now of things that I like, that are interesting to me. A really huge chunk of that is psychology. But sometimes I have to step away from it because I find it so overwhelming when I'm learning new things about myself and when triggers step up. So there is absolutely nothing wrong with seeing something that confronts you and stepping away from it. And that's quite counterintuitive to say as a content creator, because you're like, keep, consuming my content, but also step away from it sometimes, because that's really important to do so. I've got a nice mixture of cat videos on there as well that just make me giggle. It's finding it's finding a balance and not consuming yourself completely in this newfound awareness because yes, it is important to be self-aware. Yes, it absolutely is important to dive into these things. I'm somebody who really enjoys reading. I'm quite analytical with these things, so I really enjoy data, and I really enjoy psychology and understanding the human emotion, understanding the human experience. That might not be for everybody, but if it is, I think having a balance is really important with that. I'm reading a great book at the minute that's by Dr. Nicole LaPera, that's How to Meet Yourself.
That's a great book.
Yeah.
I gave that book to my mother.
Oh, did you? Did you throw it out?
I don't know, we stopped speaking like a week later. Actually, right, I'll tell you a funny story just before we end there, is that when I was reading it, it was all about how, part of it was about how you were parented, and I thought, if I give this to my mother, hopefully she gets a little insight into the way she treated me, but she's going to turn it on her mother, right? And we had an argument sort of thing because we were going away and I wanted my sister to look after her dogs. I said I'd pay her, and my mother was like, no, they hard work. And I was like, my sister doesn't work, she stays in the house. I just wanted her to, right? We had no one else. My mother kept kicking up a big fuss about it and saying it's not fair. My sister's in her 20s, right? They went to my grandmother's around the corner and then text and said, oh, I forgot that book, the one you just said. So I was like, so they came back to pick up the book, and I was already still full of tension over the conversation we had. And then my mother said, I've already booked a week off so I can have your dogs. But she'd kicked up this argument about how unfair it is without telling me that she had time off anyway. And I was just like, do you feel like a family? She was like, of course. And she was in the street. I was like, do you feel like a family? And she was like, yeah, I'm your mother. And I was like, right. But I'm like having conversations with you. It's like our last blowout. I was like, I'm trying to have conversations with you in my house, and you look at me and then look away. And she's like, Ben, I'm trying to talk to your children. And I'm like, I'm your child too. And then about 2 weeks later, she got contact. So hopefully that book gave her a bit of fucking insight. One more question I have for you, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
If you could go into the future to when you were 80 years old and you looked back at this point of your life right now, what would you be proud of?
Ooh, what a question. What would I be proud of? I think I'd be really proud of the safe space that I'm creating for my children. Yeah, I think I'd be really proud of that. And I hope that I am creating that for them and they understand how important that is, because, they do come to me, they do tell me things, but they also have that healthy little bit that they keep back for themselves, which I think is absolutely fine at their ages. They're 12, 10 and 8. And they know that I hope they know, they'll be able to tell me when they're adults, but I hope they know that they are the priority. Yeah. And that I am doing everything within my power to create that safe space, but also to hold myself accountable for when I do make mistakes, and will speak to them and apologize and that kind of thing, and do my best to change the behavior. There will be things when they grow up that they're like, I didn't like that you did that, and I'll have to hold my hands up to, because that's the same for everybody. We have this myth that we break cycles, and that we are going to break all the cycles, and we're not. We'll create some new ones, because that's human evolution. Things will be very different when I'm 80 of what is the gold standard for parenting and how it should be, and I'll have made mistakes, but I will be accountable for that. And I think hopefully my ability to be accountable and willingness to change behaviors if I see them as harmful will really make a difference to them. And
you are doing a great job raising highly emotionally intelligent kids, and normally intelligent anyway. Highly emotionally intelligent kids. You should be proud of yourself. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and I know people will take a lot from it. Where can people find you online?
So you can find me online on Instagram and TikTok, either at Toby and Rue, which is how I started out all of this. But you can also find my podcast page, which is at Unfollowing Mum, on both of those. Oh, and Threads now, of course, as well. Hang out on there sometimes. You can find me on YouTube as Harriet Shearsmith, and you can listen to my podcast globally, which is Unfollowing Mum. I think we're about 30 episodes in now, something like that. So whenever this goes live, we'll see how many episodes we're in. But yeah, that's where you can find me.
Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for honouring me with your time and your wisdom too. I will speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Thank you so much.